Red Sox ownership spoke out about the trade deadline yesterday, so we got a lot to talk about. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Red Sea Radio. My name is Corbin, and yesterday, the de facto face of the Red Sox ownership group, Sam Kennedy, spoke out with Tom Caron about what the ownership is thinking coming into this year's deadline, and there's a lot of interesting stuff in here, stuff that could be setting themselves up for failure. So what we are going to do in today's videos, we're going to break this down a little bit. We're going to break down what Sam Kennedy had to say, what it could mean for the Red Sox coming into this year's deadline, and ultimately what it means for ownership. But before we get into that, just a heads up, we are using a new camera. If you can't tell, we're still working on the framing and stuff like that, but I wanted to try it out in today's video. So let me know in the comments down below, what do you think about this camera? And thank you all very much for clicking on this one. Let's get into it. Okay, so the interview that we are talking about today was actually yesterday on NESN, where Sam Kennedy sat down with Tom Caron before yesterday's loss to the Oakland Athletics. They talked a lot about Rafi, his leadership, all-star appearances, all that good stuff, but we knew TC wasn't going to let Sam Kennedy get away with not talking about the MLB deadline, and that's exactly what he did. So there are a couple of quotes here that I want to talk about. The first one is the big one, and that's the one that's been making its rounds a bit on Red Sox Twitter. Tom Caron asked Sam Kennedy if the right deal is available, and that means you have to take on a decent amount of salary for this year, will you do it? Sam's answer was very quickly, without question, followed right behind by something like, and this is a bit of paraphrasing, but it's right along the lines here, this ownership group over the last 2 decades has proven time and time again that resources will not be a problem to doing everything we can to be a winning championship team now and in the future. Right off the bat, I don't love this quote. Biggest reason is because that's just a flat out lie. Maybe over the past 2 decades, there have been examples of the Red Sox using their financial might to improve this baseball team, but we know for a fact that over the last couple of years, that's simply not the case. We know that going into last year's deadline, the ownership group gave Chaim Bloom a very strict budget, which made it difficult for him to add at last year's deadline. We know from Sam Kennedy himself that coming into this season, there was a very clear budget on what the Red Sox were supposed to look like monetarily coming into this season. And what I think this quote does is set Sam up for failure. I don't love the idea of saying, oh yeah, we'll be perfectly fine taking on $20 million or $27 million at this year's deadline if it means that they are going to be able to compete now and in the next couple of years. Because if they don't do that, well, fans are already upset and fans are already questioning the idea of Red Sox ownership actually caring and investing in this Red Sox team. What this has the potential to do is add a whole lot of fuel to the fire. Now, I will say I do like the fact that Sam's fired up here. He is visibly, genuinely interested in the success of the Boston Red Sox, and actually, Craig Breslow was sort of similar in the way he was talking about this team as well when he went on to a Fenway Rundown podcast earlier this week. So I like that idea, but right now, to me, these are just simply words. We haven't seen Sam Kennedy this fired up since basically the offseason when he told Red Sox fans that we were liars for questioning whether or not ownership was actually invested in this group. And so to me, looking at this, it's just sort of words right now. That's all it is. It is words saying, hey, we're going to talk the same talk that we've talked for the last couple of seasons. We're going to say the same things that we've said over the last couple of seasons. At this point, Sam, we understand that this is your job, and your job is to speak for the ownership group and say what we want to hear, but until you actually do something about it, these words mean absolutely nothing. So to hear this sounds absolutely fantastic, but I just get nervous. I get very, very nervous because of how they've backed up their words over the last couple of seasons, that they're going to say something like this. Everyone's going to be like, oh boy, this trade deadline is going to be something to watch, and then we end up with Luis Urias again, or a similar player, right? And it just ends up being this thing where we go, oh man, not again, and it just adds fuel to this fire, divides the fan base even more. This team doesn't get the respect it deserves, because right now there's still people who refuse to watch this Red Sox team because of what ownership did this offseason. That's not what this team deserves. They are a fantastic team. They are a fun team. They are a young team. They have been grinding their ass off this entire season. I would hate to see that ruined by words said from this front office headed into a deadline. So right off the bat, I absolutely do not like this quote from Sam Kennedy. Kennedy, obviously the meaning behind it's fantastic, and I love the idea that the Red Sox are so invested in this team that they are willing to go beyond financial reason that they had coming into the season to get it to where it needs to be. But I also just get unbelievably nervous because of what we've seen over the past couple of years when it comes to quotes like this. But that isn't the only quote that Sam Kennedy had in this interview that I want to talk about. So let's get into that second one. However, before we do that, make sure you guys have hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you're new here, we talk stocks almost every single day. Also, make sure you guys have hit the like button on this video as well. It just helps these videos out a ton, and it would mean a lot to me. Thank you all very much for taking a second and doing so. Let's get into the second quote here. The other quote I want to talk about from this interview is one that actually happened earlier in the interview that I haven't really seen a ton of people talking about, and I do think it's worth mentioning when it comes to what the Red Sox ownership is viewing this trade deadline like. Basically, what TC asked, I don't know if I have the exact quote here, was something along the lines of, has the last month and a half changed ownership's expectations of the deadline, and if so, what does this team need? And Sam answered without question, this is a team that feels like they are on a mission. Just keep winning games. The market, it's early. It's July 10th. It's a couple of weeks away, and the market hasn't started to develop. We will see what happens over the next couple of weeks. You can never have enough pitching, and we know that pitching comes at a premium, but we will be ready when the opportunity comes. That's a whole lot of word salad that front office executives have gotten very, very good at relaying to the public, right? Sam Kennedy, specifically the Boston Red Sox in general, have gotten really great at just sort of answering questions without actually answering anything. But I think there are some important things to pull from this. The first one is that I think if the deadline were today, ownership's backed into a corner a bit in terms of whether it needs to buy or sell. He understands that if he were to sell with a team doing this well, that would be a really big issue. It would cause a lot of issues with fans. And I'm wondering if ownership is seeing this as an opportunity to say, hey, wait a second, we can make ourselves look really good here without taking on a whole lot of money. If we go out there and we make some minimal impact deals that do end up solidifying parts of this team, we could look like an ownership group that cares without actually having to spend a ton of money, which honestly, I'm fine with. If you're going to improve this team and you're going to give it a chance to actually win these baseball games, but you're not going to go out there and make a $20-30 million trade, I'm all right with that. As long as the team benefits in the long run, that's fine. But my other fear with this, yes, today, based on what they've done over the last couple of weeks, they would be a competitive team at this year's playoff race. They would also back this ownership group into a corner that forces them to spend. But my fear is that ownership is looking for a reason to not buy. They are looking for a reason to say, oh, well, over the last couple of weeks, we saw some holes that we just don't think are going to be fillable by this year's deadline. And I'm fearing that's the reason why they are being so selective in the way that they are approaching this year's deadline, because neither Sam or Craig Breslow has mentioned anything about the fact that they are leaning one direction or the other. This was sort of our first hint that, hey, ownership kind of views this team as a buying team as opposed to a selling team. And part of that, I think, is a very good reason, and that is just simply not playing your hand right. They don't want to come out here and say, oh, we're absolutely buying and backing themselves into the corner of buying, trying to debate other teams as to what the cost of a player would be. But I think part of it too is that, hey, they're kind of looking for a reason not to have to go out there and give up prospects or spend money, and that's a really big fear of mine. The other part of this is that he's absolutely not wrong. I like the fact that ownership understands what this team needs to be successful, and that's pitching, right? He said we can never have enough pitching. We know that pitching comes at a premium, but we will be ready when the opportunities come. Now, what does that mean? I'm not entirely sure, and honestly, I don't know if Sam Kennedy knows what that means, because he ultimately probably doesn't entirely know what John Henry's ultimately going to set the budget at. But what I think that understanding is that if this team continues to perform the way that they are going to perform, ownership's not really going to have an option but to buy, and that's going to mean going out there and taking advantage of some of these opportunities. So I kind of like this quote a lot better than I like the other quote, because it's not setting themselves up for as much failure. It's understanding what this team needs to be successful, and it's understanding that, hey, if the trade deadline were tomorrow, this team has done enough to be buyers at this year's deadline. So I like that a lot, and ultimately looking at what Sam Kennedy said overall, Again, it's a whole lot of word salad. It's a whole lot of, we've heard this 100 different times. When are you actually going to do something about it? And until you do something about it, that's all it is. It's setting yourself up for failure until you can turn some of these words into success. So overall, I like that Sam Kennedy's fired up. I like that Sam Kennedy's coming out publicly saying things like the way this team has performed over the last few weeks has absolutely changed their perspective about what this team could be. I like the fact that he's coming out here and saying, yeah, if the opportunity is there, we are going to be willing to financially invest in this Red Sox team. But again, we've heard that time and time again. Over the last 2 years, we've heard that, probably 15, 20 times, and every single time, either Sam has had to walk it back, Sam has had to call out fans and tell them that they're liars when in fact they aren't, or they just flat out don't do it. It's lying on top of lying, and that's my biggest issue right now. It's not the words that Sam Kennedy said, it's the actions that this ownership has taken over the last couple of years that make me extremely hesitant as to what these quotes actually mean. I would love to sit here and say that Sam Kennedy came out here, said these things, and I totally believe him. I just simply don't right now, and that's my biggest concern. The Red Sox ownership has a lot to prove at this year's deadline. It's the perfect opportunity to show that you are not only invested in making money off the Red Sox, you're invested in seeing them win. You're invested in helping this young team who's come together a lot sooner than you thought they were going to actually win some championships. So the way I look at this deadline from an ownership perspective is this is your opportunity to really sort of change the narrative here in Boston. You've got a prime opportunity. It's time to take advantage of it. I'm hoping that these words mean that Sam Kennedy and ownership understand that this is their opportunity and not, hey, we're just going to say what people want us to hear and then we're going to do whatever the hell we want and pray to God the Red Sox hit a cold streak right before the deadline. But that's going to have to wait and see. So let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think about this? What do you think about what Sam Kennedy had to say with TC before yesterday's game? Do you like it? Do you not like it? What do you ultimately think it might mean for where the Red Sox end up at this year's deadline? Let me know all your thoughts on the latest from Red Sox ownership in the comment section down below. As always, if you made it to the end of this video, do me a favor. Make sure you guys have hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you're new here, we talk Sox almost every single day. Also, make sure you guys have hit the like button on this video as well. Just helps these videos out a ton, and it would mean a lot to me. Don't forget, new cameras, so let me know in the comment section down below. What do you think about it? Is there anything I should change? I'm not too camera savvy, so I'd love some input. Also, don't forget that you can get these episodes in podcast form if you want to listen instead of watch. They're available everywhere you get podcasts. All you have to do is head over to your favorite podcasting app and look up Red Seat Radio. Thank you all very much for clicking on this one, and I will see you in the Red Seats.